Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. We are now doing episode 3, and I'm very excited. We took a break in December because everyone was having their holidays, and I thought it was best for people to just have some time to rest and spend time with family, friends, pets, and everyone. But I'm happy that we are back, and today I have some amazing guests. I do not have any old guests, so we have fresh new people. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But I just want to again thank you everyone for being here. And the reason why I chose this topic, African customs and ceremonies, is because many times when we speak about Africa, and this is something I've noticed with just Africans in the diaspora, is that we always start our stories with colonialism. We start our stories with slavery. We start our stories with when the continent was invaded, and when things were changed, the way of being, the way of believing, the way we dressed, the way we thought, the way we learned. And I think it's very important for us to intentionally change this, and we can only do this by doing it ourselves. So no one is going to do it for us, and we have to show people how to do it. So I want us to focus on pre-colonial Africa. What did we do? What kind of people were we? What kind of customs did we have? What taboos did we have? What kind of similarities did we share? What were our fears? What was our spirituality? What were the gender roles? What did we do as a people that was different to what we did after we were colonized? So it's going to be very different from the usual conversations because we're going to be centering ourselves. We're going to be centering our own activities and our own beliefs, and not colonialism, not Europe. So I hope everyone can learn something today from this, and I hope it gives everyone some courage to know that it's okay. It's okay for us to center ourselves, and it's okay for us not to always worry about what people think about us, because we are all, most of us, especially those of us who are living in Western countries, we are very westernized. And when you go to any new environment, or if you're born in whatever environment, you're gonna be like the people there. You're gonna try to adapt. You're gonna try to blend in and fit in. And when we do this, it means the languages we use. I'm using English. It's not my first or my second language, but even when we use languages that are not of our ancestors, it changes how we think. It changes how we do things. So we become more like the places we are living in. We're not really like our grandparents. And I think this affects us in very many ways. And it affects the way we work. It affects the way we see each other, the way we see our fellow Africans back at home, the way we understand them, the way we misunderstand them, the way we view education, the way we view qualifications, the way we view sources of information. So for example, when we're speaking about, especially online, when we're speaking about what happened in the 1960s and the 1950s, usually we have to, I know I do this a lot, and this is something I need to work on. When someone shares a post on LinkedIn, I'm going to ask them, but where are the sources? So this is something that is ingrained in me because I'm in a Western space, and I've also been educated in a Western space. So we always looked for these sources, and everyone's going to Google. But it's very different when we are in our own natural, original settings back home. And I realized this, like, for example, when I'm speaking to my father, I was speaking to him the other day about what happened, how his life was growing up as a child. And again, we did talk about colonialism. But I realized when I was having conversations with my dad, I relied on him. I didn't rely on other sources. At no point did I think to tell him, hey, but Dad, you have to go, check with someone else. I know my grandparents are gone, but I never thought of asking him, go check with someone older than you, because he's an elderly person now, almost in his 80s, around his 80s. And I never thought of doing this. But then it's very different when I'm with my fellow Africans, including all of you, when we're speaking about something. The first thing I'm going to think about is, but yeah, where did you get this information? Who said it? And also, even when we get to the sources of information, we have been socialized to doubt ourselves. So if it's going to be a page or a news site from Kenya or from Ghana, then the first thing we're going to be like, but can I find another one? And we have to be honest with ourselves. This is something we do. This is something I do. And this is something I'm working actively against, because I do realize how colonized I am. But all these things that we do, the small everyday things, are because of how we have been colonized. So today, let's not focus so much on that. And if we do, I would want it to be about what can we change and what can we build together, because a lot has been destroyed, a lot has been erased. The erasure, oh my God, and we need to find a way to reconnect to our roots before invasion of Africa. So I'm gonna let Ify go first, and Ify is gonna if he's an expert. So we are gonna be very educated today. So if he's gonna go first, and then Hope is gonna go next. And I would want for you to introduce yourself. Introduce yourself the best way you want to, for people to remember you and for people to know you. And also go ahead and introduce your topic, Ify.
Good morning. Sorry, it's morning where I am. I have to catch myself. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I feel very welcome. And I will do my best to not disappoint. And I keep saying that because you put me on the spot. You said, oh, Ify's an expert. And I thought, I really have to show up as an expert today. So good morning. Well, hello, everyone, again. My name is my proper name is Ifeanyi. Did you see that? My proper name is Ifeanyi. But in Nigeria, and Hope can attest to this because I know Hope is Nigerian. If your name starts with an I and an F, people call you Ify. So I grew up being called Ify. And I'm very excited to be here today. I am a doctoral candidate at York University in Toronto. But before then, I've done all kinds of other things. I have a master's degree also in gender studies and feminism from York University, and a long time ago when I lived in the UK. And most of the work that I do, at least currently, because I've done different kinds of things, but most of the work that I do right now is trying to excavate the way Igbo West African people, and I'll talk about Igbo people later, sort of my tribe, my people. I'm a native Igbo person. So most of the work that I do is excavating the ways in which Igbo women lived before colonization, sort of the way their societies were arranged and the kinds of positions that they had in those societies, the kinds of patriarchy that existed before the colonial encroachment, and just kind of the kind of status they had, if any they had, right? And many of the ways that I do this work is by looking at spirituality. I look at spirituality in particular because, as opposed to how we think about spirituality in the West, for Igbo people, at least back then in particular, spirituality was incredibly intertwined with their everyday life. It wasn't something that was separate. Spirituality showed up in everything that you did. It was a part and parcel of your life. And so that is why I interrogate spirituality in particular. While interrogating spirituality, I also look at power, because conversations that don't have power in my mind are kind of meaningless, because there's always some kind of power struggle going on. So I also look at power. I look at power through spirituality, but I most specifically look at the kinds of spirituality that Igbo women practiced that gave them access to forms of power. That's like the quickest way of describing what my work entails. And that is my introduction. So I'm going to go into sort of my talk, and my talk is going to be very fluid. Whilst you were talking, Mary, at the beginning, I started writing down things because you were very insistent that you didn't want us to kind of focus on colonization. And I had to make sure I looked at my notes real quick I'm like, I need to take off all this colonization stuff because you're absolutely correct. I agree with you that many of the ways in which we talk about Africa, we always center colonization, and we do it so many times that we don't even realize that we're doing it. And it would be really fantastic to have discourses about Africa that colonization is not centered. So I would do my very, very best to make sure that I don't center colonization, which is kind of very natural to me to do. So before I go into my actual talk today, I wanted to very quickly locate myself in this research, because I think it's very important if you're doing the kinds of research or you have the kinds of interest that I've mentioned, that you are somehow associated with that research. I think it's very important to be able to be sort of to find yourself in the research, and so I'm going to do that. So, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, I am an Igbo woman from Igbo, West Africa. I'm from the state they call Anambra State. For people, if there's anybody that knows anything about Nigeria, the ways that Nigeria is described is very rudimentary. There are three major tribes: the Igbos, the Hausas, and the Yorubas. So I'm going to stick with that very rudimentary explanation of Nigeria, in as much as it's a lot more complex than that. So I'm from one of the three major tribes. I'm from the Igbo tribe, and I know the word tribe is very triggering for some people, but this is the only way that I can kind of describe it in this context. So I am from the Igbo tribe. I'm an Igbo woman. I'm an Igbo mother. I have two girls. I am married to an Igbo man. I'm an Igbo native speaker. I was born and raised in Nigeria, and so I grew up in the culture and I grew up in the community. And whenever I'm doing research in my community, because I predominantly do research in my community, I come in as an insider and an outsider in a way. An insider to the point that I'm from that community, and an outsider in the fact that I've been away from that community. And most of the time, presently, when I interact with my community, I do so in a very kind of temporary way. I come in and I do research, and unfortunately I have to leave and I come back again. So I think I need to explain that tension between the coming and the going, and all the complexities that are associated with this idea of coming into your community and then leaving quite quickly. And the other reason why I also do the kind of work and the kinds of interests that I have is, like I said, I'm very interested in power. I'm always looking at the dynamics of power. I'm constantly looking at who holds the power, why does that person hold the power, in what ways is that person using that power, and in what ways can that power serve other people that are away from the center. Now, another quick note about Igbo people is that Igbo people are not, they're very complicated, and I say complicated not as a bad thing, but I'm trying to say that they're not they're not uniform. They have different cultures and different ways of lives, and amongst the Igbos there are many differentiations. However, in Nigeria, you could be an Igbo person from the southeast, and you can be an Igbo person from the Anioma South communities. So you're either going to be from the east or you're going to be from the south. This is very broad. I don't want to go into the details of Igbo culture, but these are incredibly broad. And whenever I do research, I try to do research from the southeast and also from the south, because I find that those two have the most differentiation in a way in their culture. So I like to make sure that I'm doing research. Again, my husband is from the South, so he'll always remind me to make sure I go to his community and also make sure that I'm representing them. Okay, so I'm going to be looking down a little because I have notes. I hope that isn't distracting to anybody. Now, central to my work, like I've mentioned before, but I think it's really important that I center more specifically why this work is important, and then I'll go and start talking about specific cultures. I do this work because of my fascination with power, which I will continue to admit, but because I want to divorce this idea that African women in particular were not powerful. I want to completely divorce this idea that African cultures, especially Igbo culture, is women hating. I want to divorce this idea completely of the fact that there was just no kinds of power afforded to women before colonization. I really want us to dispel these ideas that we have about African women, that we were subjugated. You know, you hear things like, oh, they were subjugated, and then they point to several cultural practices that we had before, and they say, well, that's why we were subjugated, and African women were just sitting in a corner doing nothing. I really want us to begin to normalize divorcing this idea of subjugation and African women, like they go hand in hand. I feel like it's really important. And why? And this is important because even when you listen to young people, when they're talking about what it means to be an Igbo woman, there is this continuous belief that Igbo women just had no place in anything. And I say this because when I do research, I speak to younger people and I speak to older people, and it's almost unanimous. When you speak to younger people, they have this belief, they really truly believe that the African culture overall is woman hating. You'll say, well, oh, African culture hates women, you know what I mean? They have all these ambitions to travel abroad because they want to go to a place that they believe is more accepting and accepting of women, because they believe that fundamentally the culture overall hates women. So my research incredibly insists that this is not true. The other things that I do in my research that I think is important is that we need to change the way that the ways in which we look at power. That it's important that we not only see power as dominance, as erasure, as subjugation, as taking over, as violent, that those things, that's not what it means to be powerful. That power shows up in very many different ways, that we cannot all attain to be powerful, and the kinds of goals we have for power is to dominate and to erase cultures and to kill people, just point blank. Those are not the kinds of conversations that we need to be having when we think about power, that we need to expand those definitions. We need to expand the appreciation of power, and we need to understand that power should be completely divorced from these kinds of elements that are very masculinist. They're very Western. They're very rigid, and that is not the way that Africans should kind of aspire to be powerful. We should not aspire to be powerful and be thinking of places that we can dominate and places that we can erase their culture. That should not be the way that we should move forward as African people when we talk about what it means to be powerful and what it means to be relevant in the continent. So that's kind of why these are the things I talk about every day. My children are probably tired of hearing me talk about this. Okay, so let me go ahead now and talk about customs. Let's go ahead and talk about customs in specifically in the Igbo culture. I do want to give a quick disclaimer that when I'm talking about customs in the sort of the Igbo setting, that I am specifically talking about customs that women practice, the ways those customs affected women in particular. I'm talking mostly about the ways in which several kinds of cultures were unique to women, and I'll explain what I mean more specifically, and the ways in which women use culture to negotiate power. This culture I'm speaking of specifically is true spirituality, right? So I think I should start off talking about spirituality so that everybody knows what I mean, to put it into context. In the context in which I'm talking about spirituality, especially for this talk, I'm talking about the way of life of people. And I know that seems very kind of vague and very kind of broad, but when you speak to people in the Igbo community about spirituality, that is how they would explain it to you. They would say that Igbo spirituality is a part and parcel of people's lives. It is incredibly connected with their belief system, with their values, with their desires, that it is not separate. This idea that you can do spirituality and then come back, it's it's all the same. The belief in African cosmology is that Igbo spirituality, everything is spiritual, not just human beings. Even objects are spiritual. And so we are living in an entirely sort of spiritual space, that if you have the ability, if you are connected with the spirits, that you're able to discern that everything about you and everything surrounding you has some kind of spiritual connotation. I want to point out very quickly that that's very different from religion. Religion is entirely different clearly, because you can do religion and then come back and do something else. And religion doesn't have this belief that everything around you, everything associated with you is religious necessarily, right? Religion has places of worship. For many religions, there are places of worship. It doesn't mean that you cannot pray in the comfort of your home, but there are places of worship. Spirituality has that as well. There are shrines, there are particular places that you would go and perform several practices. However, you take your spirituality with you wherever you go. Other things about religion and spirituality that I do want to sort of differentiate is that for most people, they will say that religion has a start date. There's a date, we can think about 2,000 years ago, this is when it began. But for spirituality, there is no start date to spirituality. It is fluid, it's life-giving, it's incredibly personal. And I think specifically for Igbo spirituality is immensely personal, because I try to explain to people that in Igbo cosmology, everybody has a god. And I think it ties into how the Igbos in general are. That I don't want to I have my own God. When I wake up in the morning, I have a chat with my God and I say, this is how the day is going to go. There's something very Igbo about that, because Igbo people like to be incredibly independent. So the fact that even in our own cosmology, you can have your own personal God that you kind of connect with and say, this is how it's going to be. This is how it's going to be today. This is the kind of day we're going to have. And your God will agree with you. So religion is the exact opposite of that. And there's so many gods I do have to mention. It is incredibly, I would need more than 2 hours to begin to explain all the deities and all the ceremonies and practices, but I decided to pick a few. And I've also decided that I will kind of speak more broadly about the choices that I've made and why I've made those choices. Yes, but those things I wanted to point out about the differences in spirituality, in how it kind of in how it is embedded in the everyday life, in the sort of, it's so embedded entirely in the way Igbo people live and the way they have always lived. Now, talking specifically about customs, what I will do is give like an overview of sort of how spirituality existed pre-colonial times, particularly for women. Now, there are many ways in which in Igbo culture, women are seen as uniquely spiritual. And I think one of those things particularly is associated with two things. Her reproduction, her ability to create is how it's described. Excuse me. Whenever we think of reproduction, we always think about motherhood. Motherhood is a huge part of reproduction. I don't want to dismiss or diminish that at all. However, in Igbo cosmology, it goes beyond just motherhood. It's the ability for a woman to create things. So not just create life, but create spaces. You will hear that women are able to create joy in a home. They're able to create peace in families that may have been fighting for decades. Their ability to create things is what makes them so powerful. Their ability to be fertile, whether it's on the land or from their wombs, is what makes them uniquely spiritual and uniquely special, gives them power. The ability of a woman to menstruate, the power in menstruation, gives her an incredibly unique kind of power, right? Her ability for many in Igbo cosmology to believe that Igbo women are closer to the spirits. And this is something that I always find when I go and do field work. I'm like, explain what that closeness means. You talked about it, Mary, about wanting proof. I want to see the proof. Give me the receipts. How can we measure the closeness Igbo women, what makes them close to the spirits? And you hear things like, oh, women's hands are cleaner, they don't get themselves involved in some kind of practices. Of course, the westernized side of me is immediately suspicious about this kind of comments, because I know lots of women doing all kinds of random things that are not, their hands are not clean. So I want that, like, how can you explain this? But what you will find, the response that you will always get is, there are many things in our culture that don't require a lot of explanation. Of course, I don't like that. I'm a researcher, I want the explanation. But you hear that there are many things in our culture that are not as obvious. The West is obsessed with proof and bringing things to light and receipts and things being so obvious. while particularly in Igbo spirituality, is the opposite. Things have to be shrouded in mystery. They have to be secret. You have to be an insider to get the inside scoop. You don't just give out all this juicy information just willy-nilly. And that is part of that secrecy is part of why it is incredibly powerful. Okay, now let me speak to the blood of women and why menstruation is immensely powerful. It is believed that in many ways, because a woman is able to menstruate, that this somehow is not only part of why she's so powerful, but it's entirely spiritual. Her ability to have this happen every month is immensely powerful. The belief overall in Igbo cosmology is that there is a great deal of power in blood, that blood holds a great sense of power, that it's not just it is immensely powerful. Now, back in the day, before colonization, when a woman is menstruating, she's kind of secluded, she's sort of put away, she's kind of left at home and secluded from all the activities and stuff like that. And for many years, the understanding of that was that women were oppressed and they were kind of kept at home while they're menstruating as a form of oppression. That was always my belief. However, in speaking to elders and many people about this idea of oppression associated with women being left at home when they're menstruating, the understanding is that, yes, they're left at home for two reasons. The same way now that we have people kind of pushing for some kind of exemption from work when they're menstruating because of cramps and stuff like that. So they're like, yeah, that's why women stayed at home. They stayed at home to rest. They stayed at home to recuperate, right? When the West does it, it's okay. When women are asking for leave, menstruation leave or whatever, people say, oh, that's wonderful, but we did it in Africa and it's a form of oppression. That's one reason why they were left sort of kept at home. The understanding was you stay home, you rest. Because we have to remember back in the day, sorry, this is a segue. Back in the day, women were farmers. There was labor intensive. They weren't out painting their nails and scrolling on their phones. They were working really hard. So you don't want someone that's in pain and that's cramping on the farm. That's inhumane. Let them take a rest when they're menstruating. The second reason why women were kind of secluded while they're menstruating is because it is believed that when a woman is in her period, that she is incredibly spiritual and she can destroy any charm without knowing. So, for example, a woman is menstruating, she's out and about in the public, and someone has a charm to do whatever. It could be anything. It could be for good, it could be for bad. That the presence of the woman alone will neutralize that charm. She doesn't even have to be associated with the people. She doesn't have to know what it is. She doesn't have to be a part of it. She doesn't have to be just being around a person that has a charm or a person that is being charmed would immediately neutralize the charm. So keeping her away was a way to protect people. I do have to quickly point out that in the way that this is described in Igbo's cosmology, it's not described as a form of danger in the way that I always looked at it before. It is described more in the way of protecting people. You're protecting the people in your environment by saying women are so powerful, we have to keep them secluded for a while. They know they should be secluded for a while they're menstruating because their very presence are just in the surrounding could cause some complications or some things that they didn't mean to cause, but just because of this power that they have embedded in them, these could cause problems for people. So whilst they're menstruating, they're home, they're resting, they're eating, they're relaxed, they're fine. And then when they're done, they can come out and rejoin the rest of society. So that was, in that way, that is how women are incredibly spiritual. I'm looking at the time, I'm going to speak truth. That's how women are immensely powerful. The other ways in which women are also immensely powerful is through their pronouncements. That's another way, through their speech, through their pronouncements. It is believed that if a woman, particularly an Igbo woman, curses you or is unhappy with you and says something to you that is negative, that it would hold a lot of weight. This idea that it holds a lot of weight is also associated with the fact that they are closer to the spirits, and them being closer to the spirits is also associated with the fact that they're able to create things. So that is part of, so that's why their pronouncements is also seen as incredibly powerful. You would go to your mother to bless you. You would go to the women in your family to speak good things into your future. That it's not as common. Like, you can go to your father for blessings, absolutely, but it's more common to kind of go to your mother to bless you, because her words have more power, her pronouncements have more power. Other ways in which African women, in which spirituality was kind of performed, was through many things in the environment. So whether it's through fruits, through trees, through some particular roots, there were many ways in which power was transmitted in our societies that both men and women could kind of benefit from. There's this fruit in Nigeria. There's an English name I always forget. Something cherry. Hope, I don't know if you know that it's udala, but it has an English name. I don't know the English name, but there's this fruit, African cherry. I think it's
Yeah,
called
I've heard people call it African cherry as well.
yeah, but okay, I can see how it has a very one big seed in the middle. Maybe that's called an African cherry. We have this fruit called the African cherry. And the African cherry tree is really big. It's a huge tree. What's it called? The trunk is short and the leaves kind of are they're very low to the ground. And back in the day, it was believed that if a woman was if she was struggling to have a baby, she'd be married, she couldn't have a baby, she would just go and sit under this African cherry tree. And just being under this tree, there was something about the tree. The tree had its own spirit in a way, that just sitting there and quietly speaking about the desire that you have to have a baby, that you would fall pregnant. That was the belief, right? There's so many trees like that and different things like that that we have lost due to colonization. That's the first time I've used the word colonization. I promise it'll be the last time. And there are many things like that, different trees, different roots that people would use in the past. There was this porridge that women particularly would make. Again, if you're having problems with infertility, that you would make this porridge with a certain kind of banana. And surprisingly, that banana or plantain no longer exists in Nigeria. And that was what they would do with some herbs and different things. And they would make this for you, and you would eat it, and you would fall pregnant. And so there was no need for IVF, or people weren't infertile. Again, they were having children early. I think it's important that we distinguish that. But more than that, that there were different ways that infertility was seen as incredibly spiritual. It wasn't seen as a medical thing. It was seen more as there was a need to align your spirits with something for you to have a baby, because that's why you can't have a baby, because you're a woman, you're supposed to have a baby. That is the belief. And so you would go the spiritual route to resolve that issue. And once you've resolved that issue spiritually, you would fall pregnant. So different things like this. And lots of those cultures and practices were kind of, the women were custodians of those cultures and those kinds of practices that were kept on for generation, that we lost because of the C word, right? We lost all those practices and all these kinds of things. And in many ways, because we were the custodians of those cultures, that gave women in those communities power, it gave them status, because they were seen as the doctors in those communities. In some respect, they were seen as incredibly respected because they had this knowledge, right? Their pronouncements were revered and trusted and believed. They had the medical knowledge, the spiritual knowledge to come up with potions and lotions that would help people. They had all kinds of different things that was embedded in the culture through spirituality that gave them a very different status in those societies. I do have to mention, if we're talking about power, that in some communities in Igbo culture, that there are queens. They're called the Omu, mostly in the south region of the Igbo speakers in Nigeria. And the Omus they're still there. We have quite a few of them still in the South communities. There are queens in those communities, and majority of their responsibilities in those communities was purely spiritual. Their role was to pray for the community, to pray for the children, to pray for the markets to be successful, that those communities would be successful materially. But a lot of the things that they did and still do is entirely spiritual. So they're seen as like the spiritual mothers of those communities. and they are incredibly respected by the kings and the obis, called the obis in those communities, because they're in many respects also, depending on the community, they're also seen as kings to some degree. Depending on the community, it differs by community. Which other ways where Igbo women? I've talked about the pronouncement. I've talked about their blood. I've talked about sorry. I've talked about their pronouncements. I've talked about through the blood. I've talked about in the environment, in the ways Igbo women were incredibly powerful. Just in everything that they did. I've talked about the power that they had through the queens, which still exists today, and all of that. So I feel like I'm forgetting something. I'm looking at the time. I'm getting anxious. So yes. So I think it's really important while we're having conversations about power that we are not limiting it, like I said at the beginning, to education, because that's how it always comes up when we are talking about power, especially people in the diaspora. It's important that we educate. We're always kind of talking about this idea of education. I'm big on education. I would never look down on education. Like, I've got all these degrees. I'm not in any way trying to say that people shouldn't get their education. Education is huge, but I think the conversation should be mostly about what kind of education. What kind of education? How are we educating our people? Who is doing the educating? Do we have some Harvard graduate coming and giving us some whitewashed? Is that the kind of education that we have? What are we doing with our own indigenous ways of knowing? What are we doing with our own indigenous brands of education? Why are we not doing storytelling? Why must all our education be in English language? Like, look at me. Like, why is this happening? Why must this always be the case? Why don't we have different ways that we educate people? Why aren't we using our own techniques, whether it's singing, storytelling, the ways that we have always impacted knowledge? What has happened to all those kinds of ways of education? Why have we discarded all of that by the wayside, right? I think conversations about the advancement of Africa must always include ways in which we can advance using our own strategies. We cannot look at America as the model, and I think that's what's happening on the continent today, that we're looking at the US as the model of success, and we're trying so desperately to fit into that model, but we will never fit into that model, and we shouldn't want to fit into the American model. The American model is, I'm trying to find a word that's not bad, but it's horrible. Like, that should not be our goal, to fit into that American model. You know, they have very unique problems. We already have problems. We don't want those kinds of unique problems. We have our own problems. So that I'm going to end on that note so that I can give Hope her time as well. Got 5 minutes over. Thank you very much for the opportunity again. And I feel like I'm forgetting something very important. If I have any time, I will circle back, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm just going to comment on something you said, because I hear some similarities with what you said when I compare your community to my community. I'm from the Agikoyo community, so we shorten it to the Kikuyu community, but it's actually Agikoyo people or the Gikoyo people. And when you mention things like the woman being the person who's creating things, I remember from my community, the first mother and the first father, they have names. And our first mother is called Mumbi in the Kikuyu language. And in the Swahili language, it's Muumbi. So it's the same spelling, but with an extra U in the middle. So Muumbi in Swahili means the creator. And the woman is called the creator in our Bantu languages. And I'm sure it's also common in other southern not just East Africa, but also other Southern African countries. So it's really funny when you think about it. When you're speaking in European languages, for example, English, and you're speaking about God, usually God is equated to the creator, right? And this is with religion. But then I'm speaking about my spirituality, and the mother, our mother, Mombi, or Mumbi in Swahili, it means creator in every Bantu language, all the way from the east until the south. So it's very interesting to see how this switched. It's like a complete switch.
That is so fascinating, because even in my culture, land is a woman in some places.
Ah,
I have to, because I'm not sure how it happens in Hope's region. Because in my place,
okay.
land, Ani, it's called Ani or Allah. That's the land. Depends on the dialect. It's female because the land creates vegetation. The land reproduces itself. The land brings things to life.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's so foundational. That's something that brings to, because it's the creator. So I
Yeah.
can completely understand how something that is the creator is gendered as female, because females bring things to life. So it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And also when you talked about power, usually in the Western context, when you're speaking about power and you're speaking about a woman, the first thing that comes to your mind is power in the workplace.
Yes.
You're thinking about money and productivity and all these things. But again, like you said, power doesn't have to be measured in the same way, or it doesn't have to be something, because many times when we talk about power, a woman having power, it's about what they're emulating from the man. So
Yes.
every definition always comes from the man. So why do we not look at power as something else? Like you mentioned about women giving blessings in the community. It's the same thing in my community. And there's this small, I can say ritual because I'm speaking about my community and it's not something negative. Usually when people speak about the things, you know how it is. The
Yes. Yeah.
very negative. But we have this ritual, for example, with our grandmothers. Uh, when they want to bless you, they just pull their clothes like this and they spit into their chest. And that's a blessing. It doesn't have to be necessarily done like that, but that's one way we do in the Adekoyo community. And it's considered such a huge, or it's a very powerful thing when your grandmother, usually it's an older person, when they bless you, that's a huge thing. And usually in the community, now we go back to power. When you're having any kind of problem, especially when it's about fertility, or you're having any kind of problem with the children, your marriage, all these things, when you're growing up, you're moving from a teenager into womanhood, you go to the mother, you go to the grandmother. These are the people who take care of you. And these are the people who guide you. These were our teachers.
Yes.
They were our leaders. So again, we go back to the perception that African women didn't have a voice, they didn't have power, they didn't have anything. But then again, there was this structure where there are certain people to take care of the whole. If there's any kind of problems, you go to these people, and that's power. That's power, because you cannot live in a community, or bomba, as we say it in Swahili. You cannot live in this homestead without this power coming from the woman. And this is something that everyone, including the men, have to respect, and the boys as well. So I really like that you mentioned these things, and spirituality as well. I think religion has confused a lot of people, and I see a lot of times people trying to do things that are more ancestral, but then they don't identify with our spirituality because they identify with more colonial religion or more foreign religion. So I do see a lot of people trying to mix things, and I see them talking about it. Hey, you know what? You're not allowed to do this. But then it's very hard for Africans to just abandon all their rituals, whether it's something to do with marriage, for example. There are certain traditions we go through when someone dies as well. There are certain traditions we go through, and I see them still being observed till today.
Yes, Mary, I have to say something. I have to say something real quick that you mentioned, you reminded me about, because you talked about this. Well, the title of my research talks about this kind of flip-flopping between spirituality and religion. So I do talk a lot about this idea of people holding on to religion and also practicing spirituality. And it happens very predominantly in the Igbo culture, where people pick and choose what they're going to do. For many people that I speak to while I'm doing field work, they have a little bit of some leaves growing in their garden that they use for different rituals, but they still go to church. You know, I had got a lot of information about how I can also in my own life sort of practice both simultaneously without conflict. And the westernized part of me was going into that research going, doesn't this contradict? Isn't this kind of clashing? And they're looking at me like, no, what are you talking about? You know, they were like, it doesn't clash. This is what we do. Like, you know, we're not white people. This is how we practice our own religion, right? And I'm looking at the ways that they're practicing religion, Christianity in particular, because in my community, Christianity is the more dominant Western religion. And it's like, it's Christianity, but it's a different, it's not, you can't bring that Christianity to the West. It's very much to that community, you know. It's fascinating how we in as much as we think that we have completely abandoned our cultures, we really haven't. We have lost many of the essence of our culture. I will be very honest with you, because even now when we practice our cultures, particularly through spirituality, we do so from a place of ignorance. I do say that, and I know that's a very harsh comment to make, but even when I interrogate the people that are doing it, they've lost a lot to some degree of many of the ways it was done before, because of the villainization of those practices already, that people that had those knowledges, many of them just died with it, because they just did not feel like it was something that they could impact in the next generation, because it would be a complete taboo. So they just kind of died with it, and they just kind of resolved not to continue on in that tradition because it was so demonized and it was seen as diabolic, and they just didn't want to have that kind of impression in their families. You know, their loved ones are avoiding them and things like that, and so you just kind of die with it. You know, you just which is very unfortunate, because we are the only people on the planet that will gladly destroy and villainize our culture and not ever think about preservation. Like, even if you don't want to practice this, preserve it. Even if it's something that you feel like you would never use, it shouldn't prevent you from preserving it. You preserve it. You just don't throw it away. But we'll say we're not talking about colonization. So.
Oh my good. And I have to mention one more thing. I'm really sorry. I know we started a bit late, but when you mentioned about when a woman is menstruating, and how in your community they will be in a different area. I don't want to use the word excluded or secluded or segregated, but about the powers that the woman is believed to have. You reminded me of something as well in the Agikoyo community. And this is something I was reminded. I went to this live a few weeks ago, and it was a Kenyan live, and they were discussing, because, we've been having protests for a while since last summer, and they were discussing about the next protests. And I remember one woman, a Muslim woman, she said that, oh, you remember, in our community, the Agikoyo community, in the Agikoyo community, the woman is, she's very respected. And when a woman is protesting and you see her full nakedness, that is considered a curse.
Yes.
She said that. And I remember actually writing about it on LinkedIn somewhere in a comment, but I remember feeling, oh my God, she has honored our ancestors by just bringing that up. Because she was reminding people that the anger of a woman, when it leads her to show her whole nation, she was not suggesting that we do that, but she was just reminding people, do you remember in our community, when a woman is angry and she's protesting about something, she would remove all her clothes, and to see your mother or the woman with all her clothes gone.
Mary, you're frozen. Okay. Hope, is she frozen for you too? She is. Okay.
Yeah, she is.
Okay.
Yeah, right. I think that I would go to my parts.
That means there's a curse somewhere. So that was something that was very weird. And again, it goes back to power. We do.
You're back. Okay. All right. You were frozen for a second.
Sorry, but network. But yeah, I think Hope, you can go ahead. I hope I wasn't lost for a very long time, and just go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ify, for the wonderful presentation you made, and you touched a lot already about power and the fact that women were not powerless as many people would think. Like when you think about African women, like what comes to mind, especially in the West, is like subjugated women, powerless women, women who are submissive and subservient to men. But contrarily to this unpopular opinion actually, because it doesn't hold a lot of water when we go back through the pre-colonial time and see what has been the situation of women at that time. We see that these are assumptions and that they are not completely true. So my name is Hope, and I have just written a book which also talks about women empowerment and the situation of women in Africa. I have been very, very interested in topics on women empowerment and how women can actually, well, in the West these days, we talk a lot about gender equality and women empowerment. And I really like your perspective, Ify, on the like relating it to our African tradition. So today I will be talking about the place of women in the indigenous African society, pre-colonial time. Oh, okay, I won't use the word colonial, but like um, many years ago, before the coming of the white men. Yeah, before the coming of Europeans. So, as we know that women were very powerful, we already heard from Ify, and that is what we know, that before the westernization, that women were also very powerful. Actually, westernization actually weakened the space, the power that women had. For example, when Europeans came and they introduced different kinds of rules, and they employed men to be in charge and did business with them, leaving the women behind. So actually, their coming actually made the place of women weaker. Just like as opposed to how it has always been thought that westernization like empowered women or is empowering women. It's actually the other way around, that women were already quite powerful. Quite many of them were contributing for the well-being of the family, holding very important positions in their family. And then when the Europeans came, then it kind of divided. They introduced rules that divided women and made men more powerful. But we'll see that a little later. So, yes, women took care of their homes in addition to farming and engaging in other uh, activities such as trade and pottery making and other things, which also contributed, which was also an additional which brought income also to the household. That means that they were also part and parcel of providing for the family. So it was not just the responsibility of the man to take care of the financial aspect of the home during during the the years before the westernization happened. I'm going to find it a bit difficult not to use that word because
Just use
that's
it.
yeah,
Use the
because
word.
it's going to like demarcate the time that we're talking about. Okay, but everything that I'm talking about today, except when I mention otherwise, refers to the time before westerners came and took over Africa. So also in the pre-colonial time, also yeah, women like male children has always been an important part of the African society because of the fact that they inherited uh, the family name and sometimes also the inheritance. So even uh, all this while, the African society has always also preferred men or male children to female children. But nowadays, uh, there's already a very big change happening, and of course, we might not be there yet that we would see like equally male and female, but this has already been in many years, and there's a lot of changes that has been made positively where everybody can be seen as equal, but I still think that a lot still has to be done. So African family, African society was also polygamous. Uh, then and then but the good thing there was that also there was a lot of community living, community life, that families, generations were also living together, and there it was possible to live with different generations under one roof, like grandparents, aunties, uncles. They all formed a part of a family in the pre-colonial times. And if you talked already a lot about power and the fact that power was distributed between men and women during the time, and African society was in many places quite egalitarian, and the structures, the hierarchy was not just based on gender in the African society, but also age mattered a lot. And there were also some matrilineal societies, for example, the Akan of Ghana, where you see that women held significant power, and they were also very powerful, also economically, and the inheritance was based on the maternal line. But we also see that in many African society, uh, the lineage was patrilineal. So the balance of power between gender uh, could shift also. It was dynamic because it also depended on the economic status of the women and the dynamics also of the family. For example, in societies such as East Africa, there are also places that men were like very much powerful, and they made decision, and they exercised also a lot of power. I have my notes in the other screen, so sometimes I would look at it to remind me of what I have written. So in the pre-colonial times, marriage was not just a union between two young adults, but it also was viewed as a union between families, and also it's created alliances such that marriage could bring different families and even communities also. Sometimes they married to among themselves for the sake of creating alliance and for the sake of to be able to protect one another, for example, in terms of war or in terms of problems. And then they would be able to protect themselves because they saw themselves that they were already united through marriage. So marriage was a very important aspect during that time. And then it can also be like political. For example, kings could give away their daughters or sons to marriage to other kings, such that they could, through that, become allies politically, and then cement their relationship, and then also share and be in control together about lands and livestock and all of that. So you talked already about queen mothers, Ify, and in many African societies, such as in Ghana, the Ashanti Kingdom, the queen mother was very powerful, and she had significant political power, and she advised the king, and then played also a very important role in selecting uh, the next rulers and the kings that came after. And she also participated, the women in Ashanti Kingdom, they participated in decision making, and also in their domestic sphere. So, but contrary to that, in Yoruba Kingdom, the men were more powerful, but still the women were powerful in domestic affairs and in controlling, for example, the domestic workers and economic affairs, so to say, in the domestic sphere. But the men then had more power and more authority in political decision making and all of that. So, like we said already, that's contrary to what Westerners might believe, or even myself before. For some time, I have also thought or imagined that actually that colonialism was what actually strengthened women, because nowadays we talk a lot about feminism and gender equalities, and then we think that okay, the place of women was already very weak and very like the women were marginalized already for many years. But to my surprise, and maybe also to the surprise of many, women actually had quite powerful positions in the pre-colonial time. And this is a very important point. This is a very important discussion that I would want that a lot of people, especially in the West, know, because they talk about a lot about feminism, but they don't actually understand or know how it has been with African women before the arrival of Westerners. And then they think that their feminism is saving, like saving in quotes, like saving African women from slavery and from being subservient to men. But I think that it's important that African women can actually stand up and tell their story of how it was actually before things fell apart, when the white people came and divided and made, in Nigeria, it's said that it's called divide and rule. So they came and divided people, especially gender-wise, made men, they came and worked with men, and in that way strengthened the role of men and made men even more powerful, and then the women were left behind. So I would want that personally, it is a very interesting topic for me, and I would like to talk about this more in the future. So like we said, that the Europeans, they altered the existing status quo where women and men were very active member of the society. Mary, you have your hands up. We cannot hear you, or I cannot hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but this is something I really want to, because you said something and I've been waiting. You mentioned about um, being married to not just your partner, not just a woman and a man coming together. It's about the power that they shared together. And I wanted to ask you whether in your communities you've had anything about wife inheritance, because in Kenya, for example, we have now over 40 tribes recognized. We do have wife inheritance in some of them. So I want to know whether this is something that happened in Western African nations and how it happened. If, for example, a man died, does the brother of the husband inherit the wife?
Well, I have heard in the past that it's happened, but I don't think it is popular these days. But I have heard that if the husband died and had a brother in line, that he would inherit the wife. Maybe if he has more details about this.
Yes, just very briefly, my grandmother was inherited, so my father's mother was inherited. So that was not, when was that? Maybe in the 50s. So, but like Hope is completely correct. It's no longer popular, but it was a very common practice, at least for the Igbos. Absolutely.
Okay. And I remember one of the reasoning they had was to make sure that the widow was going to be taken care of, and also the children of now the brother is taking care of them, but to make sure also the nephews and the nieces are also taken care of. But I think it's very important to talk about these things, because if, for example, an outsider, non-African person is telling this story, then there's room to misinterpret or why it happened and how it happened. And this is not me saying that I'm justifying it. No, I mean, we're in modern times now, and we understand there's also risks. With everything we did, we understand the pros and the pros and the cons. So, but the point is that it's very important that we are the ones who are telling this story, because then we are able to tell people. Like when Hope mentioned about power, being able to protect yourselves if there's war, there's calamities, if there's anything coming to you as a group, you're stronger together. If the families already had a bond and you chose each other to to continue this bond through marriage. So I really wanted to say that. And yeah, you can go on. I have a few notes here, but you can go on.
Yes, that also brings me to that reminds me also when we talk about power, that women were also very powerful, in the sense that, for example, in Igbo traditional societies, a woman could also like marry somebody and bring the person home. Of course, a woman is not capable of impregnating another woman, but then the woman that is married to the home had an opportunity to decide for herself a male friend who would give her children. But this woman that's married her would be like the official husband. And in that way, the women also exercised power, in the sense that they could also live in their own home and have also a family, even though not biological, but they were regarded completely as the woman's children.
Okay. Was it because they were not able to have children? Because that also happens in some East
Yes,
African
that is one
communities.
of the reasons.
They bring in a younger woman, and then the
Yeah,
younger woman is the one who's going to have children. So again, it's to continue their generations, to
yeah.
continue the family, and to make sure. And you see, this is very, you see, when we tell it, we are giving the reasoning, and we are telling this is because of this, because of this. But when other people tell it, yeah, they're not going to be able to tell why this happened. This is so interesting. My goodness, I
And
wish we.
because they don't know the background information, so they are very quick to misinterpret, or
Yeah.
to tell the story in a
Yes.
way that fits them. They
Yes.
could liken it to like discrimination, or they can use all sorts of negative
Yes.
terms to describe
Yes.
this. But as an African who knows the culture and who knows the cultural background to
Yes.
these stories or to these practices, then it's easier to
Yes.
explain it in a
Yes.
way that it is um, not just understandable, but in a way that it is objective.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and that is why I think it's very important that Africans should tell their own stories,
Yes.
and not somebody coming to observe them and then makes a story out of it that
Yes.
suits them or that suits their audience in the West. And I
Yes.
think that's what happens a lot,
Yes.
because they know what people want to hear in the West. They want to hear about the subjugated African woman. They want to hear about the harmful practices that bring women down, or that keep women down. And then they go there, they find things, and then they make the story
Yeah.
to that
Yeah.
effect. So
And when you mentioned land, now because I'm drawing these connections between our different communities, and this is what we should do, because when everyone is telling about their own story, then we are able to educate people that we are not connected in ignorance, because this is one thing that they connect us. Africans are ignorant. Africans are this. Africans are powerless. Africans cannot govern themselves. But now going back to this marriage thing, one of the reasons why there was the polygamy, and even in the case where there was an older woman marrying a younger woman because they cannot give birth, was because of land. And I don't know if it was the same thing in your communities, but in some East African communities, it's because if there is land, for example, if a husband dies, or this is an older person and they don't have children, where is the land going to go to? So they need to make sure that they have people who will continue to take care of the land. And then remember, we lived in communities. It wasn't one or two people. It was like a whole homestead with animals, and everyone had their own portion of land where they could farm. They could all do all these things. So when you do not have children, when you do not have people to help you take care of your land, then that was a huge thing, and that was a scary thing. And so they had to make sure that there's continuation and there's protection of the land, and protection of the name, protection of the clan, and all these things. And yeah, this is very interesting. But yeah, go on.
Yes, perhaps I should conclude and give time for discussion because perhaps we have more to talk about on this, and I don't want to be the only one talking. So, the main point and the summary is that contrarily to the popular or the unpopular belief or assumption that African women that the Westerners came to rescue African women from subjugation. The reality is that women have always played a complementary role to African men in a traditional African society, and they have been part of decision making in many societies. For example, in Igbo society, they have what is called Umada, that's a, like a gathering, like in a kindred, there would be like all the first female children would have like something like a union or something, and they would make decisions. They are very powerful, the Umada community. So these are different ways that women exercised their power, be it political, be it also domestically. So they were not powerless as people would want to believe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now that was amazing. See how excited I am, just because I'm going back to when I was very young, because in primary school they will teach us all these things. So because we have so many different tribes, we would learn about all of them. Like, today we're going to learn about the Agikoyo, tomorrow the Abaluya, then the Luo people, the Maasai. So I just realized, oh my God, we took so much we took in so much information at such a tender age, and then we also learned different dances. I remember learning different songs not from my tribe. I remember being in the music and drama club, and I remember we shared our stories, which is very different to what people say, because people say we're very tribalistic and that's all people know. But people don't live with us day to day to understand that we are going to the same school, we are seated in the same class, and we will learn about the Michikenda community. It doesn't matter if there's a Michikenda person in the class, it didn't matter. This is in the syllabus, this is in the textbook. You will learn about the Michikenda. Then you will learn about another part of Africa that is not even, your neighbor. You're going to learn about, what happened with Nelson Mandela, what happened with this people. And now going back to, again, I love this marriage thing. There's one thing we haven't talked about: women. We haven't talked about bride price. Can we talk about bride price? Because I know for a fact in many Bantu, Nilotic, Kushaiti communities, but let me stick to Bantu. Many of them, we still have dowry ceremonies, especially in the Agikoyo community. We have something called Rorashio. So Rorashio basically means dowry, and it's the whole entire ceremony. And it's because it's practiced in so many Kenyan communities, people don't even use their own language to describe it. They just call it in the Kikuyu name. So everyone says Rorashio. It doesn't matter if you're Bantu or Nilotic. Everyone just says, I'm going for a Rorashio. I have a Rorashio. So because it's such, we are the majority tribe, but this is something very important. Let me tell you, a Rorashio can make families fight. They can make families decide, you know what? No, we're not dealing with you. It's a very serious thing. And I've seen the Rorashio with families where the daughter is a doctor. So it doesn't matter if she's a doctor or she's a teacher or a nurse. This is something that I've seen going on till today. So I would love to know just a bit about this in West African cultures, whether you practice it and some of the things you do during the dowry ceremonies.
If you would you want to go first, or
I was waiting for you very patiently, Hope. Oh, thank you for your presentation. My brain just froze. I was still thinking about your presentation while trying to answer this question. So thank you so much for your presentation. It was very enlightening and very educational. Thank you. The dowry, yes, we have the bride price, the dowry. It's called Igbanko in my place. So we definitely have that. It happens in your traditional sort of the beginning of your traditional, the conversations for your traditional wedding, because in Nigeria, most people overall will have a traditional wedding. They'll have a civil wedding in court, and then they'll have the white or church wedding. Most people kind of do that. So yes, it's very important. I don't know anyone that got married that didn't have a bride price. Like it's non-negotiable. Like I know some people now, everything should be put into context. I know whenever you hear conversations about bride price in the West, it seems like somebody's selling somebody's child. That's always how it is portrayed. The same way polygamy is portrayed in a very particular way, or African men, they just want to gather all these women. You know, everything has to be put into context. And I think today we've really emphasized why that's important. If the focus is never on it, it seems like a transaction, but it is a transaction, but it's a different kind of transaction. It is always the way in which it is sort of performed is like a token. This is a thank you. Thank you to the family. And I always tell people it's quite rare for you to visit a home of an African and not be given something to eat. Like it's just a custom, like a glass of water, whatever. So it's that same way. Like you've come to my home, and this is a thank you. This is a sign of appreciation. I value what I am. I value our interaction, and I value the fact that you are going to become a member of my family. And there is going to be that kind of transaction that will take place. But of course, if you decide to only focus on the transaction and not the other things associated with why the transaction is taking place, then it seems like somebody's selling off their child or what have you. And the way it's done in many communities now, in some communities, let me be particular, it's a token. Like I remember my bride price was less than $1. It was very, just like it was less than $1. It was given to the elder in my community, and I was pissed. Excuse me. I was like, is that all I'm worth? Like, it was so annoying. I was like,
yeah. Don't tell anyone in Kenya that they will send you back.
Oh really? Oh, it's so cheap in my town. It's pathetic. It's so cheap. The women, like, it's not even worth bride. There's not. So when you talk about bride price, I just had the flashback of that, and I was just like, oh, that was ridiculous. It was so ridiculously small.
I think the main thing is it is symbolic. So the money is not the smaller the money, the more symbolic it is. It is a token of just like you come to my house and I give you this. So it's not business. As somebody would, maybe a Westerner who hears about bride price might think that's like they're selling the wife to become like the man's property. But it is, in our culture, it is a symbol.
Yeah. And they think it's something like slavery, but it's not. And I'm also trying to think about the reasoning behind it. Many times they wanted to know that, can this man be able to take care of our daughter? Can they be able to take care of them? And when you think about it in that sense, I don't see anything wrong with wanting to make sure that your child is going to be well fed. Because even though they're over 18 or whatever age they were back then, it was probably younger. But I don't see anything wrong with wanting to know that you're not just letting your child just get out. So most of the times, this dowry process and the whole entire ceremony, or ratio, like we call it, it's usually a way to first understand who is this man, where do they come from. Like it's a whole process. People don't know that. People think it's just you go, this is the price, go. No, there are negotiations. They're trying to understand who is this family. What do they do? What have they done before? What do we expect? What do they promise to do for our daughter? Because this is something that has a whole lot of people coming into the room and discussing, and they're taking everything seriously. So the smallest part of it is where they actually exchange the gifts. That's the smallest part of it. The conversations, the negotiations were meant to protect the woman. Because if they didn't care, then anyone can just come and pick you and go. So, and I think even now you still see there's some sort of strictness in the family where, especially in my community, if you're living with your parents, there's some things you just cannot do. And now we can compare them to here. There's certain things you just cannot do in your mother's or your father's house. And it also, whether you're dating someone or whether you want to get married, there are some things that we do in Africa that actually protect the girl. And those are things I would want us to maintain, because when you go back in time, for example, we had a process before you get to a point where you're having a child. And by the way, a disclaimer, this is not me judging anyone or saying that the way anyone decides now in the feminist, modern feminism times, the way they decide to procreate or when or how, I am not judging them. So again, we are centering the African community. So if any thought comes to you and you're thinking, remember, we are not here to make other people comfortable with what they do in their own communities. This is me centering my community and saying, for example, marriage was expected before you have children. But people don't talk about that when they talk about our customs. They talk about us being enslaved by men, us being oppressed. But you see that there was a system, and the system was there to be able to make sure, for example, we didn't have children who were not fed, children who didn't have protectors, children who didn't have people to educate them. Because remember, you're getting educated by your father, your mother, your grandparents, the whole community. So when they went through this process to make sure that people are getting married before they do certain things, it was to make sure that they continue with this way of being and this way of learning, and just making sure that the children are not, they don't go astray, and they always have someone to look over them. And it's not just spiritually, that the people within the community are taking care of them. And that's all it was, just protection. And then again, I think you mentioned about polygamy. That's another topic that makes people, whew. And I am Kenyan, and people, I don't know if people believe this, but I know people in my age set. I'm now, how old am I? Am I 42 or 40? Yeah, I think I'm 42 or 43. I'm going to be 43 in July. But honestly, I forget sometimes. So I'm 42, and I know people in my age set. And this is even back 10 years ago when I was in Nairobi. I had people in my age set who would very openly tell me, fellow women like me, that they're okay with being a second wife. And people think this is a wonder, but to me, it's not, because I come from a country where it's not a big deal. And I never thought to myself, okay, let me judge them, or let me know. I'm going to speak to them. This is a person who has education. They have a whole education just like me. This is a person who has an amazing job. Maybe they're working in advertising, in whatever. They know what they want, but we never speak about the reasons. Why does this woman say she would be okay being a second wife? It's not always because in the West, people think it's because they have they have low self-esteem, or they don't value themselves. But we have to remember there are people who have only lived in these societies, and even though they have a Western education, they have seen their grandparents or they have seen their own parents live a certain way, and to them they saw it working. I have seen a family. He had 3 wives, and I remember he owned this huge complex of apartments, and they all lived. One lived in one block, the other one in another block, the other in another block. And on the weekends, one of the wives would take all the children, because they had a van. One of the wives is taking all the children, and then they would go have some sort of activities, and they had money. So people don't talk about that. And I didn't sense, like, I cannot judge what happens in their homes, but there are women who choose this lifestyle, and they're okay with this lifestyle. And they're okay with raising children as a whole, like a homestead. So we need to remove the stigma from topics that concern our cultures, because especially in the age of DEI, we cannot always present ourselves as Africans who are westernized and say that's the complete story. It's not the complete story. There are so many types of African women. There are African women who follow their spirituality without any apology, without religion. There are African women who want to be in polygamous marriages. There are women who want there to be a bride price. And we need to be able to respect them, because when we respect people, then the way we respond to their decisions has to be respectful as well. Because when we respect their decisions, we are saying we know you know what you're doing, and we do not think you are an ignorant person, like what people say in the West. They think we are all ignorant, and a white woman has to come and save us, teach us, educate us, and all these things. And I don't believe in that, because we've always had our elders, the grandmothers, the mothers, who taught us very many things. And I think we can make our own decisions without people thinking that we are just ignorant. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that part. What have we forgotten? What have we forgotten? I want to know from
Ify has her hands up. Ify, did you say?
Ify, go on.
Oh, I wanted to say something based on what you were saying about you were saying something about polygamy and the choices people make and how there's diversity. And I just remembered, like, there are couples in the West that choose to be swingers, right? They are open relationships and things like that. And I think it's really important that we understand how the racist framing of different things happen. Like, for a woman in the West that's a swinger, she's seen as very forward thinking, empowered. She's very she has great sexual literacy, for example, and all these kinds of things. Because she's a swinger and she's in an open relationship, or if a woman is bisexual or different things, it's seen as something, right? But the example that you gave, if somebody wants to be in polygamous marriage, then she is subjugated and she has no self-esteem and things like that. It's always about that framing, and there's always racism and there's always power behind these things. And that's why in one context it is seen as completely acceptable, not just acceptable, but seen as very modern, very, very 21st century. And then in other places it's seen as quite uncivilized and barbaric and things like that. You said something about I think there was something that Hope said, and then you kind of expanded on this, something about sort of how the colonization kind of attacked women and how it diminished the status of women. You talked about that, Hope, and that is a very popular strategy of colonization, to always attack or diminish the status of women first. You see that for example, in Canada, where many of the institutions and policies that the Europeans had in Canada, first of all, attacked the Indigenous people, Indigenous women, because in the Indigenous women of Canada had a very important status in this society. So the first thing they did was to diminish that status so they could gain entrance, because they wanted to be in conversations with the men. So put the women aside and diminish the women so that we have access to the men, and then we can build all these institutions and have women scrambling to kind of find their position. So it's been replicated in many different places where the goal is to attack the women first. If we also think about, for example, in the Middle East, and we think about what happened right after 9/11, where there was such an attack on the Muslim woman. I don't know if people remember that, like 20 years ago, they were in the Middle East looking for the weapons of mass destructions that don't exist. But somehow the conversations changed from looking for weapons of mass destruction and Osama bin Laden to now let us now protect and save Muslim women. It was such a huge shift. And the whole media was just, books were written. People made lots of money trying to save Muslim women from Muslim men. That became kind of the focus, that we need to go there and educate them, and we need to go and save them, and we need, right, while you're in their country, bombing them and just completely destabilizing their economy. But you're in our country saying that you're saving our women while you're destroying their lives, right? So we can see this pattern in different pockets of the world, where the West says that they're saving people, but they're doing their own thing and extracting oil and doing other more, that's kind of what they're doing. But then they say they're saving women. But the goal is always to diminish the status of women, because that gives people access. Because women, if you don't destabilize women, it's going to be hard to gain access to those communities. We're tough. So you have to fight. You've got to put us in the corner so that you can kind of take over. I do have to mention, Mary, that there are some questions in the Q&A, and I feel like the first question is kind of for me, and I wanted to address that real quick because I'm looking at the time. The question here, the first question here, I don't know if that's the question everyone can see first. It's from Chipo. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And the question is about expanding the definition. Is it about expanding the definition of power or revisiting our traditional notions and definitions of power? So it is about both. It is about definitely expanding the definitions of power, completely troubling the way in which power is appreciated, like foundationally, the way how we identify what is power and who is powerful and who has power. We absolutely have to expand those definitions. And it's also about revisiting our traditional notions and definitions of power. So the easy answer is both. It absolutely, that is the goal for me to do both. I hope that answers your question. That will suffice. I do see that there's a second question here from Mary. And Mary is, I suspect the question is for me, but hope you can absolutely chip in at any time. The question here is about, we talked about spirituality, and everything having a spirit sounded a lot like, you know, what you've heard in many indigenous communities around the world. And then the next question that you sort of comment you had is, how much do people talk about and keep those traditions alive in cities in the modern way? And that is such a great question, because in many of the research that I've done, people have been very creative in how they've kept those traditions alive. And like I mentioned, there is like a combination of Christianity in my community, that's what's most popular, and some of those spiritual practices. So there's some kind of flip-flopping between both simultaneously. There is some people practice just traditional Igbo spirituality on its own, but most people have found a way to incorporate traditional spirituality in their lives. So even if it's things that, like Mary mentioned, whether it's true in weddings where there's some practices where there's a pouring of libation and different things that happens in that way, where there is kind of calling on the ancestors and praying to the ancestors, that happens, but also in their own personal lives, in the different things that they do, whether it's in some of the medications that they drink for certain illnesses, it is spiritual in some regards, or just even in those spiritual practices where they have certain things in their home. There are different things that people have, whether there's something called unzu, I don't know the English, it's a kind of chalk that people will own in their homes, and they will have it in their homes in some place private, and when they're praying they would use it. Some people will have alligator pepper, that's another thing that people would use in their homes. You would never know that's what what they're using it for, and they would pray. There's several leaves that people will have growing in their backyards that you can use to cook, but they also use them for spiritual practices. So people have found some kind of way of incorporating both. We also have many in Igbo society, in Igbo societies as well, we have many churches that are like indigenous Igbo Christian churches. So even when you go to those churches, there's some of the practices that are not Western in a way, whether it's how they sing, how they dance, how they're preaching. So there's many ways in which Igbo people in particular have incorporated those traditional practices in their lives today, through religion and without religion. So it's kind of a combination of both. So Mari, I hope I've answered your question.
And I would like to add that unfortunately, also due to being whitewashed, a lot of people think that African traditional religions are evil, so to say, and that they should be abandoned. You can see also people in modern times in big cities in Africa who have disassociated themselves with African traditional religion, or even practicing African spiritualities, because they have been told that it's evil and that they must do away with it.
And I think one of the reasons why, because when the kind of education from Europeans was introduced to us, that was the same time when we were told, by the way, your beliefs and your spirituality is actually, it's uneducated, it's not civilized. So I think they all worked hand in hand. And I remember this is what they taught me when I was a little girl in school. These were tools of colonialism. Education was one of them, language was one of them. So in the English language. And it's funny because we sat in class and they're teaching us everything, but they're not teaching us how to release ourselves from it, because they're telling me English is a tool of colonialism, but then they're teaching me in the same language. I'm going to learn math in English. I'm going to learn Christian religious education all the way till I'm 18 years old in English. And it's just, it's really, I don't know. I think when we decolonize, we need to find ways, like in Tanzania, they use Swahili. And usually there's this joke between the countries where Kenyans tell Tanzanians, oh, you don't speak English, or we speak better English. And then Tanzanians are telling us, oh, you're proud of being colonized in this day and age, and you're bragging about being colonized. You need to learn from us. And I think it's really amazing when we have societies where they actually learn in their own language. Germans learn in their language. Finnish people learn in Finnish. Swedish people learn in Swedish. Why do we still think it's okay for us to learn in a colonial language? And what does that do to us? It does a lot of things to us. And now I'm jumping to something totally different. In the beginning, I think if you mentioned about the significance and the meaning of, being around certain plants and leaves and trees and everything. And it's the same thing in my community. My father, till now, this elderly man, there's certain things he will take. There are certain trees. In the Kikuyu community, we have the Mugomo tree. I think it's a pear tree in English. So this has a lot of significance in my community. But that just generally, there are certain things he will make concoctions. Can we call them that? That he will boil certain leaves and certain things that are stray from the forest. And he will do this because they have some health benefits. And I believe him, because he's such an elderly man, and he's still every single day, he's taking his daily walks. He doesn't eat 3 meals in a day. He's very organized. I can only eat 2 maximum. There are times he will go and say, I can only eat once a day. So I believe whatever he has been drinking from this forest since we were little is working, because he's still standing strong. And this man has rarely gone to the hospital, just like my grandfather. We always talk about my grandfather. We lost him when he was hit by a bicycle somewhere. It was a very bad fall, and he hit himself. And we lost him after that. But I remember he lived to old age, and people used to say, this man has never gone to hospital. Of course he's gone to hospital, but he was not a regular. And when you think about how when we talk about things like, health and diet and all these things, we have abandoned so many ways that were meant to protect us. And that's why we're having so many health complications, because we abandoned our own ways. So when Hope mentioned about thinking that westernization came to liberate us, and not just women, there are so many things it brought to us that harmed us. And we can see this in our health, in the way we do things. For example, now we have so many children that have been left behind by their fathers are not taking care of them. But this, back in the day, let's be honest, this would have been something that is frowned upon. Having children, multiple children, you're a father, but you're not present. This is not something, let's be honest, in our fathers and our grandfathers' times, this is not something that was done. So the westernization and the freedoms, not just the freedoms they talk about that they brought to women, the freedoms they brought to the African man have also destroyed the African home. So there's different ways of looking at it. And the one thing, of course, I can appreciate is that now we have laws that are meant to protect us. So, for example, things like female circumcision, FGM, this is not something I would support. This is something I stand against with everything in me. So there are things about our cultures that, we don't practice a lot anymore. There are still some communities that practice them, but they do them illegally because they are no longer legal. And I do appreciate that we now have this, laws that warn people, including parents, against child marriage, for example, as well. So, but yeah, all in all, I think there are so many good things that we need to go back to. There's so many things, and we can only do this by talking about them. We never talk about it because we are in a Western space. Even those who are in Africa, we are trying to emulate Westerners. Young people are trying to emulate Westerners. When they're listening to music, it's Western music. When they're learning how to dance, it's Western dances. When they're watching TV, they're not watching anything that our grandparents and our parents did. They're watching Western TV shows and reality TV shows where there's a lot of, consumerism and, just, showing off and living a life that is above your means and all these things. So we've really moved away from our traditions. And I hope we can have more conversations about this so we can encourage the generations behind us, or even our own generations, to try to go back to what worked. Some things did not work, but some things worked. And by now we should know what they are. So I think we can have someone who raised their hand.
I have to say something, Mary, real quick, because I didn't want to forget. And it was because of something that you said. You talked about language and learning in the classroom, and they're speaking the colonizers' language. And I think that's such a really important point that we sometimes forget. And because we've been so socialized, I'll speak for myself, been so socialized in English language that I have to have the conscious effort in my head to switch to Igbo. It has to be like switch now. I have to like force myself to do it. And I remember when I was writing my dissertation, I sort of sent to my school that I was going to write my dissertation in Igbo language because I know how to write Igbo language. And there was so much pushback. I spent like 6 months back and forth with my institution because of this. They wanted me to justify, and there was so much, they didn't come out and say you can't do that, but they went all around to say that you can't. But but it cost me 6 months of my life, the back and forth, to be able to write portions of my dissertation, especially the parts of my interviews that were done in Igbo language, to write them in Igbo language, because that was how it was done. I didn't want to lose anything in the translation. I wanted it to be exactly what was said. So I just remember that. I also remember the politics, again, of funding. Like for those of us that do research that only serves Africa, because I do research that only serves Africa, even if I'm in Canada, we don't get funding. It's very difficult to get funding of your research. It's very hard because you're doing research in Africa. And so whenever I think about decolonization and things that we can do materially, I think it's important for us to begin to create our own funds that fund research in our continent, so that we have more people encouraged to do research in our continent. Because I have a bunch of friends from Africa that don't do research in Africa. They do research in North America. They do research in Black communities and Black Canadian communities, because that's where there's funding. Yeah. They would never consider doing research in Africa, even if they are from Africa. They were born and bred. They come here and they do research in Black Canada, which is great. We need all kinds of research, but they don't do research in Africa, particularly because there's no funding. So if you're doing research in Africa, it's pure passion. It's from your pocket. You're doing it because of your love. It's all passion, because there's no benefit to it. Like, you're doing it because it's something that you really believe in and something you're really passionate about. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out real quick so that I don't forget, while we're thinking about the future and the ways forward for Africa and how we can materially begin to change our futures in our own terms.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And you know what? As a business owner, as an African, I wasn't raised here. I only came here to study here. I totally understand what you mean. Let me tell you, when you are African and you are focused on Africans, whatever you're doing, that's on you. Most organizations that claim to care about, women, they care about humanity and DEI, they do not want to. They don't support us, and they don't support us in the ways that really count. And you mentioned that we've talked about how people come to African societies to educate us and to westernize us and to save us. But here's the thing: the ironic thing is that if you haven't even been able to be an ally or supported the African women in your community, because we are everywhere, how are you going to tell me that you're going to Africa to save us? What are you doing there? How do you know to even speak to us when in your own community, everything we're hearing is racism and feminism that's not intersectional? Like, what are you doing? So to me, it's just it's a farce. It's not. Yeah, I don't believe in white saviorism. But thank you so much, everyone. Please give a closing statement, everyone, and then we will close. Hope.
Yeah, I was just about to add something to this and what Ify said. I think it's very important that we would not depend on, for example, Westerners, for example, to fund our research. I think it's very important that in Africa and even in diaspora that we would develop such, for example, funding opportunities that people who want to have research on Africa, about Africa, would have access to these funds. Because when you are funded also by Western power or authority, you are also, they might have their own requirements,
Yeah.
and that requirement might not be exactly what you intend to do. So it's important that we also are empowered economically, so that we can, because when you're economically empowered, you can, for example, decide on what topics you want to base your research on, and then go for it.
Yes. Agreed. And this is something that I always, I talk about this a lot, and I say we need for our Black community, our African community to step up. Because if you're waiting for anyone to save us, no one is going to save us because they've never saved us. We need to be able to build our own spaces, build our own industries, our own businesses, do our own research, because we cannot complain about people misrepresenting us, appropriating us, and vilifying our stories and us when we ourselves are not doing the right thing. We are supposed to be leading in telling our stories. We are supposed to be leading in sharing our research and telling people the kind of solutions we want in our communities, in our societies, the systems we want to employ, the systems we want to dismantle. We should be the ones doing that. And I think we have enough organizations, whether they're based in Africa or here in the West, that can be doing something because we are represented. We cannot say that we're not represented. We are represented. And there are finances, there's the money to put into the research and into the work. And I really hope that our whole entire diaspora takes this seriously, because right now it doesn't look very good. But yeah, Ify, close for us. Do you have something to share before we say goodbye?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's always very rewarding speaking about African futures and what that might look like, and sort of dreaming about how our lives could be and the things that we need to do to get there. It's always amazing. Thank you. Did you hear my kids? They just walked in. So it's always wonderful to be able to do that. So again, I want to just kind of reiterate the point that Hope made as well about the economics of things. I think in many ways that that Africans have kind of, and I say Africans in general, I know that's very homogenous, but I'm doing it deliberately. Many ways in which we have kind of organized the focus on the economics of things has been a little bit kind of wishy-washy because we don't want to sound like we're always talking about the funds and the money. But we live in a world where this is incredibly important. We need charity begins at home. It's important that if we're saying that we want to build institutions, you don't build institutions with ideas. You need ideas, and you also need the funds to be able to do that. So we need to begin to put our money in places that are important. And Mary, you mentioned a few times DEI. At least in the US, Trump has rescinded every DEI initiative out there. So it was so easy for him to just take office and pull everything back, because that's what happens when you don't own the rights to your own movement. For example, someone can just show up and say, no, I don't like this, it doesn't appeal to me, and then put an end to it. We have to put ourselves in a place where we're not vulnerable to those kinds of things, where our institutions are strong enough to stand on their own, where they have the backbone and they have the backing, and no one can just show up and just say, no, I don't like this, it doesn't suit me, and put an end to it. That's if we really want to make the kinds of changes that we deserve. I always, when I talk about African futures, I'm always very big on, we really need to figure out a way to live more harmoniously with each other, to find a way to to limit the hierarchies that exist in the continent, because there's so much hierarchies. Oh, this people, oh, that people, oh, French speaking or English, oh, those ones that speak Portuguese are the Africans. You know what I mean? We need to figure out a way to limit those hierarchies that exist, because it'd be so hard for us to really come together, and we do have to come together and have those kinds of relationships that are not hierarchical. We have to get rid of it so that we can move forward and we can have those collective goals. We have to look inwards. Charity begins at home. We have to fund our own projects. Trump again, I have to mention Trump. I apologize. I try not to mention Trump at all, but he comes up. Trump has also kind of stopped funding for HIV medication in all of Africa. How can somebody do that? That's incredibly powerful, that someone can just say, you know what, we send too much money to Africa for HIV medication, and when I'm going to stop that. You think about the ripple effects of that decision, how it will affect hundreds of thousands of people. So we need to have our own, we need to have more autonomy over our own lives, so that we're not constantly being weaponized or commodified, and all the things that happen to us. We need to get our act together.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My goodness, after you give statements like that, what can I say? What do I say that's good? I feel so lucky to be in this in community with all of you, because when I decided to do this event, I decided I'm not going to be the one who's doing all the talking. I do a lot of typing. So it's very intentional for me when I invite people and I tell them, you know what, you have 40 minutes to cover this, you have 40 minutes, or you have this, because I want people to see us, I want people to hear us, and I want people to remember. We are doing something here. There are people who have never been to a session or a class, because this is like a class where an African woman is teaching them anything. But now they can do that. So this is also meant to dismantle the tokenism. This is why we always have African ancestry people. It's very intentional. So I'm really, really happy that you all came. I'm amazed by you know what? I'm not surprised. I knew I had experts. So I mean, we have experts here. We have an author, like, come on. So I knew you were going to deliver, and I am so, so proud of all of you. And that's why you're here, because I'm proud of you. And thank you so much. I hope we're going to have more sessions like this, because as you can see, there's a lot to talk about. You try to narrow a subject and you still can't get to the point where you're just speaking about one thing. There's a subtopic here, another one here, another one here, and you can't even exhaust one subtopic in 2 hours. So I hope to have you back again. And I hope that now we're talking about funding. I would want to have a platform where we have African women, African men, African people coming in to educate, but then they are also compensated. So like a platform where we are teaching languages, we are teaching different things about African culture. We are talking about what feminism means to us. What do we prefer? But we need educators to do that, but the educators also need to be empowered in the right ways, because again, ideas alone, no, they do not work. We need ideas, we need resources, we need power, we need people, we need all these things together. So let's hope to have more of these sessions. And everyone who's here in the audience, thank you so much as well. Thank you so much. Sorry for the delay we had in the beginning. Yeah, tech has a thing. Tech is against me, but thank you so much for coming. Thank you for participating, asking the questions, making your contributions in your own different ways. I'm very hopeful, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen next. So thank you so much. If you haven't connected with this lovely, amazing experts, educators, author, please go to their LinkedIn. You're going to find them in my post from today and the last time talking about this event. Please connect with them, support them. And if you have any opportunities, this is why we are here. So I'm happy to connect everyone around the globe. Asanteni sana. That's thank you in Swahili. Asanteni sana.
Thank you.
Have a lovely
weekend.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, bye-bye. Have a great day. Great weekend.
Oh, This was so good.